in today's world, we're witnessing an increasing number of conflict situations with billions of people being affected, especially children and young individuals. According to UNESCO, 250 million children or youth are out of school, and 763 million adults are illiterate. Nigeria also has its own share of this palatable sort of situation. Ultimately, education is seen as a fundamental human right and a public good which is being eroded, a situation which we cannot as a collective afford to continue. If we think of it in this sense, if education is indeed a pathway out of poverty and seen as a route to ensuring improved future outcomes for young people, it is therefore critical for us as a collective to address these issues in a timely manner so that young people remain engaged, skilled with the knowledge required to access and build jobs, and can in turn support the growth of economies, which will hopefully lead to the growth of peaceful and prosperous communities in the future. Our objective with this morning's conversation is simple. We would like to, through this platform, kickstart conversations with strategic stakeholders with the capability to move the needle in terms of policy and action on the areas that I've outlined. Our discussions and audience hopefully will include regulators, policymakers, development and sustainability experts, private sector impact makers. Through the discussions this morning, we hope to do two key things, to identify and to support. So in terms of identification, we want to identify practical solutions for creating functional and safe learning environments for children and youth in Nigeria. We want to support the collaborative actions taken by government and private sector in the investment and improvement of the education sector. We want to support curriculum reform to promote active citizens and build peace ambassadors. And we want to support the acceleration of the achievement of SDG 4 by 2030, because obviously we do not act alone as individuals. We all have common goals, and we want to find a way to help us work together as a collective to achieve the goals that we have outlined. And this morning, as brilliant as I would like to think I am, I'm joined by an esteemed panel, so I won't be having the conversation by myself. So I am joined by distinguished speakers and thought leaders. We have Mr. Albert, who's the Executive Secretary of the Association of Development Education in Africa, who will be joining us a little later. We've got Crystal Ikani Musa, an advocacy and public policy specialist, public policy and global advocacy for the Global Partnership for Education. We've got Dr. Goodswill Agbagwa, the founder and executive director for the Center for Social Awareness, Advocacy and Ethics. And we've also got Professor Mohammed Junaid. He's a professor of education from the Usman Danfodio University and the former executive secretary for the National Commission for Colleges of Education. We are also joined this morning by our esteemed host, who's also the CEO of Sterling One Foundation in Nigeria. I will now be handing over to Kweju, who's the CEO, Olakweju Ibekwe, who's the CEO of Sterling One Foundation, to give us her welcome and opening remarks. Thank you very much, Kweju. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Adetobi Shoyinka. Thank you so much for that brilliant introduction to the subject we'll be engaging on today. On behalf of the board and the management of Sterling One Foundation, I am very pleased to welcome our guests and our partners that have joined us from across the globe for this maiden edition of the Thought Leadership Series, which is being held in commemoration of the International Day for Education. I would like to also sincerely appreciate our partners who have made this event possible. We have the British Council, we have the Global Partnerships for Education, we have the Association for Development of Education in Africa, and giving.ng. Thank you so much. Please permit me to also appreciate our partners at the Africa Social Impact Summit, which event led to this one that we are having today. Today we are discussing education, and the theme is learning for lasting peace. Adetomi, in her introduction, has already shared with us some of the interesting statistics we have on education in Africa and in Nigeria today. It is obvious that we are far behind on the 2030 target of SDG 4, and it is time for us to start rethinking how we approach the subject of education. In Nigeria, with over 20 million children out of school, it is really not acceptable for us to go on with the business as usual strategy that one will say has been employed so far. This series is also to set the agenda for the African Union Year of Education that has been declared by the African Union and the United Nations for 2024. Like no other year, all stakeholders have to be very intentional in investing in education in this year. And for private sector organizations, it is also an opportunity for us to increase our investment in education, from foundational learning to early learning, to literacy, to higher education, to TVET. Like no other year, this is time. There's no better time than now for us to align with the global agenda, the regional agenda, and also the recently released education roadmap for Nigeria. So on behalf of my board, once more, I welcome every participant here. I thank you for your commitment to education in Africa, and that is the reason why you're joining us today. I am so glad to be joined by the experts in the room. From Crystal, who is from the GPE. Crystal, thank you for joining us. Dr. Godswill, thank you for joining us. Professor Mohammed, who is actually representing the head of UBEC, the Universal Basic Education for Nigeria. He is representing him, Professor Mohammed Junaid. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to learning a lot today, and Mr. Albert of ADIA will also be joining us soon. Please, let's fasten our seatbelts as we have a very insightful, educating, and I hope very inspiring time in this room that would help us direct and strategize on how together we will transform education in Nigeria and Africa in 2024 and beyond. Thank you so much. And at this point, Adetomi, I'll have to hand over the virtual mic over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro. You've done such a fantastic job. I feel like you need to moderate the entire conversation for us this morning. And thank you for the welcome messages and for, giving us that great overview. So we'll dive right into the conversation now. And I'll be asking our panelists a couple of questions. And the focus is on the foundational context on the outlook of education transformation in 2024. So I'll be going straight into it. We'll have some time towards the end of our discussion to take questions from panelists or from our audience in the room. If you have questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat box if you can. And towards the end, we'll look at the questions and pose them back to our panelists if that's okay. All right, so I'll start with Professor Junaid. Professor Junaid, are you on screen? Let me see if I can find you. Okay.
Yes, I am.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
We're going to be focusing on you as a government institution, given the position that you represent. Your government institution is in charge of foundational learning. So we would like you to briefly highlight, the educational challenges you think we should prioritize in 2024 to help us accelerate the actualization of that SDG 4.
Well, good morning. Thank you, and good morning to everybody on this panel. My name, as you said, is Muhammad Junaid. I represent the ES of UBEC, which is Universal Basic Education Commission in Nigeria. I'm afraid the challenges have not changed over time. In fact, some of them have been compounded, like access and equity has been compounded by the fact that education has come under attack. And it's not only in Nigeria, it's all around the globe. And I think Ade Tomi has mentioned some of the figures, about 250 children out of school. Now, this means the conventional approach of schooling is not enough. When you have so many children, in fact, more children out of school than those that are in school, then you need to find alternatives to education. You need to think about how do you reach the millions of children that are still out of school. In Nigeria, you quoted about 20 million children out of school. How do you reach them? And it's a big challenge for the Universal Basic Education Commission. And the attack on education by the Boko Haram, which from the name negates education from the beginning, that education is out of the question. Nobody should go for education. That's a big challenge. And in the Northeast and even in the Northwest, we have bandits and people that are attacking schools, getting children out of school. So how do you now get children who are afraid to come to school for fear of being abducted? How do you get them into school? Even if you have money to build enough schools to accommodate everybody. Children are afraid, parents are afraid that their children may be abducted and they may be there in the hands of bandits for several years without, resolve. So one of the key challenges is how do we provide access to education to everybody that deserves education, because education is a fundamental human right for everybody. And because of disruptions, there is also the issue of equity. Equity in terms of how do you include everybody? You don't leave every child behind. You need everybody in education, whether in a formal school or outside the formal provision. How do you provide access to everybody? And then the question of quality. Quality is a big issue. Apart from equity between gender, between the social classes, between children that are able and those that are with disabilities, and children in emergency that are displaced from their schools. How do you get access to them? What alternatives do you have to schooling that will provide access to everybody? And how do you ensure quality when teachers themselves are targets of attack? So quality of learning outcomes is not about equitable access. It's also about equal learning outcomes. How do you ensure that every child has equal learning outcome? So there is a big problem also of teacher quality. Do we have enough teachers? We don't. And many of the teachers, or at least a proportion of the teachers, are underqualified or not qualified at all. So how do you ensure that every child has access to good quality teacher to ensure good learning outcomes? So teacher quality and management is also still a big issue. System strengthening is another big issue. How do you get the states to be committed to education and to ensuring that everybody in their schools has access to good learning, has access to good quality teachers, good materials, and so on? So it's also a big issue to strengthen the system. politics sometimes, politicians politicize education in a way that they establish schools without making adequate provision to ensure quality learning takes place in their schools. And then you have education financing and resourcing. Government cannot by itself provide all the funds that are required for educational provision. So how do you source funding, additional funding to supplement what government is providing? That's a big issue as well. And sector collaboration. We have so many donor agencies that are collaborating with different agencies to assist in the area of education, but there is no coordination of their efforts. So how do we now ensure sector collaboration is efficient? How do we get all the people that are interested in helping Nigeria in its education system to come together and have a common goal and common path or funding and common goals that they pursue?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. You've given us so much to think about. And in fact, I think we could just get stuck on your question for the rest of the session. But we hear you. You said business as... Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've heard what you've said. Business as usual is not enough. Business as usual cannot solve the problems that we have. We have issues around equity, access, quality at all levels, the quality of the outputs from the the schools we have, the quality in terms of the kind of teaching and engagement that's done in our classrooms. You've talked about a very critical issue for us as Nigeria specifically. You've talked about security. How do we ensure that no child is left behind, especially when we are delivering education interventions in emergencies? You've talked about the lack of coordination across, various bodies, international development bodies, private sector bodies. We all have, common goals and common interventions that we're looking to deliver, which is, to drive impact and change within the education sector, but we don't seem to be working together as a collective. And as a result of that, we have fragmented we've got fragments in terms of the kind of success that we've been able to achieve. We haven't been able to move together. The kind of impact we've been able to achieve has been fragmented, as opposed to what we might be able to deliver if we do come together as a group and as a collective, working together to try and move impact forward within the education sector. Thank you so much for that, Prof. And I'll be coming back to you, and I can see people putting lots of questions or chatting and introducing themselves. Please go ahead and be doing that. Drop your questions in the chat and we'll come back to that. Crystal, I'm going to come to you now. Crystal Ikani Musa, still on the commemoration of, so we're going to look at the commemoration of in the IDE in 2024. Could you tell us what practical actions do you think different stakeholders, including private and the corporate sector, be looking at in order to reduce the number of out of school children, to improve literacy, to strengthen accountability for learning outcomes in schools in Nigeria in 2024 and beyond? So what do you think, just looking at specifically at the private and corporate sector, what do you think, what kind of initiatives do we want them to be looking at to reduce the number of out of school children, to improve literacy, to strengthen accountability for learning outcomes in Nigerian schools in 2024 and beyond? Thanks.
Thank you, Adetomi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Crystal Ikani Musa. I'm the Advocacy and Public Policy Specialist at the Global Partnership for Education. I feel this question is very befitting, especially for me working with the Global Partnership for Education, because we are a partnership. For those of you who don't know, GPE, we are a global partnership. We're the world's largest fund for education. And so we have partner countries. We also work with private sector as well, NGOs and CSOs. And so I would say this is an example of partnership in action of what I would say we need to do, what the Sterling One Foundation is doing, bringing more awareness, advocating jointly together to ensure that education is getting the limelight that it needs, not only for government to intervene, but also for private sector to intervene as well. As Professor said before, it's not only government that can do everything, but private sector as well can intervene, even down to the family level. We also believe in that as well. And so looking at today's topic for the International Day of Education, and also highlighting the fact that this year is the Year of Education declared by the African Union, it's very timely for us here at GPE. We recently released a report that we jointly conducted with the International Institute of Economics and Peace. And this is where we're using research and evidence to supply it to different countries to actually see the correlation between education and peace. And so normally we talk about how conflict violence is interrupting education, but we should take a look at it from a different lens and see how education actually supports peaceful societies. And so there are so many examples of that within this report from different partner countries that we've invested in. And so knowing that there's been a lot of conflict, especially in countries like Nigeria, we definitely advise that countries look at increasing their spending in education during these times. And so education financing is critical for a peaceful society. We have seen this example in so many other countries who have witnessed violence and conflict. For example, in Rwanda and South Africa as well, when they were coming out of their conflict eras and investing more in peace building, you saw that the government invested more in education. And in Rwanda specifically, they used education as a means to build back up the nation and that unity that they needed. And so looking at the topic for this year with peace, trying to build long-lasting learning towards peace, it's important for us to also see that correlation. We have evidence that we created through this report that we strongly hope that Nigeria would take a look at as well. There's other examples from African countries that we've worked with. For example, in Namibia, which is one of the safest African countries that you have. It's correlated to their investment in education. They're the sixth largest investor in education globally, not just in Africa. And then you can see that because of that investment, they have a more peaceful society. So like I said, it's not just something government should do. Investment, yes, we're talking about education finance and investing from the government as well, but we're also talking about domestic financing, which means private sector also comes into play and also invest in education also. So thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And I've learned quite a lot myself about the report that you mentioned. Very useful. Is it open access? Is it something that is publicly available to all? Would you be open to dropping a link so that the members of the people on our call can also have access to that resource and information as well?
Absolutely. I'll find the link. It's on our website. We just launched it this International Day of Education. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And it's as if you could, you have some sort of, you could tell and look into the future, because education financing was actually something I was supposed to follow up with you on, but you've you've addressed that very nicely. And the need, I like what you did with bringing in, highlighting the fact that it's not just about government focusing on what government can do or what government should do. It's a collective responsibility. So it's private sector, it's government coming together to achieve this goal of financing adequately such that, there's that continuous learning that people have access to. I'm going to go to I'm going to go to our next speaker, and that's Dr. Godswill. Dr. Godswill, we're going to touch on human capital. And I would like you to think about, there was something that Professor Junaid mentioned when he talked about, so teachers' capacity building. So the quality of teaching and engagement in our classrooms. So let's think about it from a human capacity, human capital development perspective. And how can we improve that? How can we improve on that? And can you speak on that from your own experience? What would you focus on? What do you think we should be doing differently in 2024 if we're going to focus on human capital development, thinking about it from the teaching and engagement angle? What should we be looking to do differently if we're going to develop this solution? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adetomi. I would love to share my screen because I have some data to share, the data we gathered from our research. We conducted a study on the status of primary schools in southeastern Nigeria. We visited over 1,387 primary schools. We trained data analysts and researchers to gather information about the status of our primary education, including infrastructural, instructional, and pedagogical materials. And we compared them against the UBEC standard. And we just published that report in December last year with generous funding from Open Society Initiative for West Africa. And so it's quite insightful, and I would like to share our findings and then focus on teachers, because that was also one of the areas that we paid very great attention to. So if you don't mind, I'll bring in our statistics on that and then share with our audience. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
So,
yes, we can.
if you look at these statistics, you will notice that we investigated the status of primary education in Anambra, in Ebonyi, in Enugu, in Imo, and in Abia State. And if you look at what you see at the bottom, there are categories not established by me and my organization, but established by UBEC, and I hope Professor is listening. The UBEC established what to call minimum requirements, minimum standards of education. So we went into the primary schools to see if our primary schools in the Southeast meet these minimum requirements. And you can see from the bottom, you can see things like school compound space, you can see classroom size, you can see teachers. So you're talking about human capital. So let me stay with teachers for a moment. Now, if you look at teachers, and this is just for the Southeast, and I think it might be worse in other areas, in other geopolitical zones, given that Southeast have a lot of investment in education. But if you look at the statistics there, you can see that, based on the colors and on the visuals there, you can see that Anambra is represented with yellow. You can see that Ebonyi is represented with blue, and you can see that Enugu is represented with green or light green, Imo with green, and Abia with blue. So if you see 85, if you look at the best performing state in the Southeast in terms of teachers, and this is not quality, this is quantity. So we're talking about enough teachers in the classroom to teach the students. You can see that Ebonyi scored like 85.95%, which means that 85.95% of the schools in Ebonyi have enough teachers to teach the students. And what do we mean by enough teachers? Enough teachers means that there is one teacher to 40 students. The UBEC recommends that students should not be more than 40 in a classroom for a teacher. But in many schools in the Southeast Nigeria, teachers are teaching hundreds of students in a classroom, and the teacher is managing so many students. Some teachers are teaching primary 1, primary 2, primary 3 at the same time. If you look at Abia State, you can see that 61.55% of schools in Abia State do not have sufficient teachers. And this means that, there is the schools, the rest of the schools, the 61.1% of the schools do not have that sufficient teachers, which means that there are fewer teachers trying to teach so many students. And of course, that would impact the quality of learning and education. And so if you look at these studies, you can then see that there is need for investment in human capital in the area of teachers. We need to train more teachers. We need to hire more teachers. We need to bring more teachers into the primary schools so that students will have sufficient teachers. I'm a teacher in the United States. I teach in college, and I don't have more than 25 students in my classroom for effective learning and understanding. So you can see that we don't have sufficient teachers, and I think that that should be a challenge for our schools, primary schools in Southeast, but also across the nation, if we must move forward, because teachers are very important in learning. And if we do not have enough teachers, and I'm not talking about quality here, I'm still talking about quantity, I'm still talking about number. If we get into the quality, then you can see that some of our teachers are not well trained, and they are not qualified, and there's no ongoing training for some of them. Apart from teachers, there are also other human capital that we need in primary schools. For example, if you look at the UBEC education standard, there are positions for sports development teachers. There are positions for agriculture, farming, education experts. There are also rooms for guardians and counselors. If you look at the bottom there, you can see where we have guardians and counseling. These are people who are trained to support students in their career path. And you can see that the best performing in the Southeast there is Ebony State with only 28.68% of schools in that place having career guidance and counselors, those who should be able to guide the students. We also have other human capital that we need in education. For example, the security personnel. If you look at the UBEC minimum standard, UBEC says that every primary school should have a security, a perimeter fencing, and there should be at least one security personnel. When Professor was speaking about insecurity, that shouldn't be a problem if we have the security fencing and we have security men recommended by UBEC. But if you look at the school compound, if you look at security in the chart that I have shared, you can see that most of the schools do not have security fencing. The classroom compound, they don't have it. The first their school compound, they don't have security fencing. They don't have security men to protect the students. We should have a student in the United States where I live and work. All primary schools have police officers, at least 2 police officers in the primary schools protecting our children. And UBEC has also recommended that in Nigeria, but we don't have them. So a lot of challenges with regard to human capital, whether it is in terms of the teachers, whether it's in terms of the guidance and counseling professionals, whether it's in terms of the sports development experts, whether it's in terms of those that support them with agriculture. And of course, don't even forget also about health, you know. And the UBEC also recommends that we should have nurses in the classrooms in the schools to support our children. So all of these are human capital. I know you pointed out only teacher, but I wanted you to know that teachers are important, but we don't need only teachers in primary schools. We also need other human capital to ensure that we have effective learning environment and we have an education system that engenders peace, growth, prosperity, and healthy human development. I will leave it at that, and I do hope I can come back to it later.
Definitely, we'll circle back to that later. Thank you so much, Doctor, for that. But I was going to ask a follow-up question of you. So you've done this research piece. Like I asked Crystal earlier, is it something that can be publicly assessed? Would it be possible to provide a link for our audience so that they can also, review the kind of data and information that you've been able to gather at a time, at a later time? Is that something that you can do for us?
Oh yeah, sure. It's already on our website, and I'm going to share the link in the room right away so that people can either download them as PDF or look at them as ebook. It's already published online, it's public, and it's been carried. We had a press conference on this in December, and it's on the newspapers and all over the place. So, but yes, I'm going to share the link. It's about 44 pages of a report, and people can go there and read themselves the report that we have about this.
So I was going to ask you a quick follow-up question about data and learning outcomes. How can we use data to support the improvement of learning outcomes? So you use data a lot in your work. You've done this report. How has it sort of, in terms of the study that you did on the Southeast, how has it helped to improve the outcomes for learners, for example, in the Southeast? What actions have been taken on the back of the report that you did, and what could we possibly learn as a sort of community of practice from the work that you are doing around using data to support further action within the education space?
Okay, so thank you so much. We just published this report last December, and it was a 2-year study between 2021, almost 3-year study. And the report, what we intend to do with data, because data is everything, is now using it to engage stakeholders in education, whether it is the government or whether it is funders, whether it is grant makers, whatever they are, those who are very interested, UNICEF, British Council, all of them, to let them know where the needs are and where we can make more investment. For example, if we look at the studies that we have done in the Southeast, we can find out, for a basic example, and it's very troubling to me, for example, 80% of the primary schools in the Southeast do not have toilets, they don't have water system in their schools. So with that kind of data, UBEC and those who are interested, who are, SUBEB and all the rest of them, can then begin to prioritize and say, okay, here is, we don't have all the resources in the world, but with the resources we have, here are the most important things that we can begin to invest in. I have gotten a call from an organization in Italy who happened to stumble through our research, and they are then beginning to see, can we help in providing toilets and water in the primary schools? Because I think they have interest in making sure that the WASH program is introduced in primary schools. But it was because of the data, because of our studies that they stumbled through online, and they reached out, and we're already working with them now to see how we can begin to provide toilets. So the data is very important, because here in our country, we tend to exaggerate a lot. We don't work with data. And now with what we have, I'm inviting stakeholders in education, investors in education, to look at this data critically and figure out, and then let's find out which are the areas, critical areas that we need to put money to. One thing also that we found out in our organization, and I'm going to speak about it because I know that my colleague has spoken about the need to put more money in education, is the relationship between the local government and the government in terms of managing education. We also found that, and it's not here, but in the report, you will read about it, our recommendations, that yes, the government may not be putting a lot of money in education, but the money that is put in sometimes is not properly used, and they are not properly spread across the most important areas. Some areas get more resources, some other areas do not get more resources, but we have to prioritize. For example, should we put more money in providing classrooms? As Professor was speaking at the beginning, should we put more money now in security? Should we start building perimeter fences in all the primary schools in the north where Boko Haram is? Should we put more money in hiring security men and putting them to enable the students to sit in school? Or should we focus more on providing desks, learning materials, chairs in the table? Or should we put more money in training, teach more teachers and increasing their salaries and welfare and bringing them into education? Or should we even invest in agriculture? Agriculture is what I hear that UBEC is now trying to do a lot more work in agriculture. So sometimes everybody's just doing their own thing anyhow. But maybe when we look at this data, we can come together and say, let's tackle these challenges one after the other. I believe with this kind of data, we should be able to catch up with 2030 SDG 4 by 2030 if we can be systematic, if we can put resources together, if we can prioritize and say, I mean, if I were to be a governor today, I would say, okay, you know, in the first quarter, I'm just going to look at this, your data, and get the worst scenario, the worst case scenario. Let's say toilets, and put all the toilets in primary schools in my state. And then maybe I can say, okay, in the second quarter, let me look at teachers. We don't have enough teachers. What does the data say? The data say we have fewer teachers in my school. Can we put more money there? In the fourth quarter, I can say, can I put more money in classroom building and all that stuff? So I think the data will play around. I think we need more studies. We need more studies. We have done some seminar work, which I don't think anybody has ever done in the Southeast, and our specimen size was very large. But I think we can build on this and continue to then know where exactly we are with some of these things. And I think we should also invest more in data. Interestingly, we have a lot of young people at our center too. We are training in data entry, data analysis. They were very instrumental in doing this work. And so the government can then have data and stakeholders can then have data to make decisions in terms of stepping up our primary education. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. That was a very robust response. So I hear you. For 2024, what we're thinking is data is king, information is king. It helps us prioritize where we should be investing. I like the way you linked it to Crystal's comment on education financing. Yes, financing and resources are finite. And if we're going to prioritize where we invest, then it is critical that we have the data, the information to support decision making. So that's great. And, you know, as you were talking and as you presented this and you talked about infrastructural issues in school, in my mind, I'm linking it to, you know, you don't think about how a lack of infrastructure within school systems will lead to, you know, interruption of attendance, interruption in learning, and then, you know, young people not being in school. So there's a ripple effect and there are things that we need to think about. But thank you very much for that robust response. Pedro, I'm going to come to you now because Prof said at the beginning, he made this great statement about, you know, having, I would like to think of it as lots of cooks in the kitchen, right? Everybody is trying to cook, you know, something, but people not necessarily working together. What's that saying about lots of cooking? This kitchen spoil the broth or spoil the stew. Yes, thank you. So essentially, we've got lots of cooks, lots of people who are, you know, wanting to achieve the same objective, wanting to, you know, aiming for the same level of impact. But the scale of the problem is quite significant. And because people have we've sort of taken a fragmented approach to, you know, trying to achieve this impact. What we have is also fragmented sort of success. And we are unable to sort of achieve the scale of impact that we need in comparison to the problems that we have within the education sector. So my question to you is multi-sectoral partnerships. 2024, what are we looking at? What would you like to see happen with that? What is your thinking as an actor within, you know, that partnership space? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tomi. And I think Doctor and I are singing from the same hymn book, if I'll use those words. At the Sterling One Foundation, we have prioritized galvanizing partnerships for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is because it has become clear that silo execution is completely ineffective if we're going to be able to accelerate the achievement of these goals that are just 2030 is between you and I is just right behind the corner right here. So last year was the mid-level, and we have little time to solve a lot of problems. We have realized that to an extent, funding is not necessarily our problem, if you would ask me, because we have a vibrant private sector in Nigeria and Africa. We have intentional development, international development community. And like Prof also mentioned, there's within the international development community, there's also lack of coordination in the funding for education. At the Sterling One Foundation, we addressed this issue by creating a convening to bring together all the stakeholders within this space into the same room for us to discuss these issues and together chart a way forward. And that is where we convened the Africa Social Impact Summit, which in this year will be in its third year. It started in 2022, where we held it at Transcorp Hilton. And then last year, we had it at Eco Hotel, Eco Convention Center in Lagos, Nigeria, like some people say, the economic capital of Africa. And we had the private sector in the room. We had the public sector in the room. We had the development community in the room, and together we were discussing these issues. During the first convening, we had about 8 partners. Last year, we had 28 partners. We are looking forward to having more partners this year to align on these issues. This is to ensure we have better efficiency in our spend. And that's the power of data, like Dr. has mentioned, because you find different organizations trying to solve the very same problems, spending the same money for the same problems. Rather, our strategy is for us to identify what works and scale impact in those areas. So we can be strategic, we can be intentional, there's structure around the investment in these sectors. So to what we want in 2024, the African Union Year of Education, we want more stakeholders to come together, to partner together. And I think British Council, GPE, ADIA, all of us have, should I say, led by example, starting this African Union Year of Education. GPE, the largest funder of education in the world, I believe, via chat. And then British Council has also invested significantly in education, not just in Nigeria, but across various African countries. And Sterling One Foundation, in our role as not just a financier with our partner Sterling Bank of Education, but also a nonprofit galvanizing partnerships towards this cause. And Doctor, with the data that he has shared, we're looking forward to more, because we're hoping to get data next year and in other years where the numbers of these issues will reduce because of the work we will all do, including the stakeholders and the chat, we will all do in this year, 2024. We're still going to hold the Africa Social Impact Summit this year, but it is not just an event, because this event we're having this morning is an outcome is one of the outcomes of the summit, because we realize that one event cannot solve the problem. We have to be intentional to continue these conversations, advocacy, if I will use Crystal's words, awareness creation, and then intentional door-to-door engagement for us to come together to address these issues. That's what I'm prioritizing in this year. We're having the convening also in 2024, and we're open for partnerships to scale the work, the good work that is already being done by various players across Nigeria, and where we have the leeway across Africa also.
Thank you very much for that, Kweju. Thank you for your comments. So building on what already exists, competition, there is no room for competition when you're looking to drive impact at scale. And I think I've mentioned this to you before. The way I see this is, yes, we are all actors running towards the same sort of goal and target. I see it, I would like people to consider this, see it sort of as a relay race, right? We are all looking to achieve the same thing, but we will all run different legs of the race. And I think it's important for us to find ways that we can hand over, build on, strengthen what we each other, what we are all doing in our various and respective fields, rather than trying to compete and reinvent the wheel. So great platform that ASIS, the Africa Social Impact Summit, has already created, and that's going to continue on as that platform to connect, to convene, and to engage with multiple stakeholder groups. That's great. And hopefully you have more positive outcomes like this particular one from that. The critical thing for me, and I've told you before, and I will continue to say it, is, and then what? What's the action? How do we move the needle? How do we move things forward? So, yes, we will push that forward. I'm being told that we have some questions in the chat. Godfrey, do you want to share those questions with us so that we can pose it to our panel? Just one or two at this stage, and then we have to go back to our panel. One or two questions. Godfrey, are you online?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Tommy. So we have a question from Matambo from Malawi, and he's asking, education is a fundamental human right, but oftentimes it's affected by poverty. How can we address that across Africa?
Okay, so which one of our panelists would like to take on this particular? Crystal, do you want to take this on, since financing was your focus, was the focus of your comment? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So as we know that there are strong correlations between education and other sectors, including poverty, GPE, for example, we've invested in so many of these overlapping areas. And so when you see there's a higher investment in education by a country, you see that the country does better economically also. And also considering that the investment in education is equal. It's very important for us at GPE to stress the fact that quality education is very important, because if there's no quality in education, that can also breed other issues. And so we've seen where countries have invested in quality education that their economies have been boosted. Specifically looking at gender, when we see that countries specifically focus on getting girls into school, there's a direct correlation with data as well that shows that once more girls get educated up to senior secondary level, that also affects poverty and lifts families out of poverty as well. And so when we hear these buzzwords of education financing, domestic financing thrown out, I do urge us to look more deeply into what that exactly means and have that discourse. Like you said as well, we investing in education probably isn't the issue, but how is the money being spent? Is it being spent with quality in mind, with gender in mind as well? Where is the budget going to? It's not just dumping money there. And so once we take a critical look at what investing in education really means, we'll be able to tackle issues like poverty. We've seen, for example, GPE, we partner with the World Food Program. We've seen where school feeding programs have really helped get kids into school. It has also helped to curb hunger so that students can learn better. But then there are other issues that are created. When more students go to school, we need more teachers. And so that's where investing in education and education financing collaboratively, we mean ensuring that while we're solving one problem, we're not creating another one, and that we have the capacity to deal with what education needs to thrive. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Crystal. I hope to the person that posed the question, I hope that responds to, I hope that you're satisfied with the response that has been provided to you. Godfrey, I would like us to take this question on Northern Nigerian girls, because there was actually supposed to be a section for us to focus on girls and inclusion, gender and inclusion in education.
Okay.
So it's from Bashir Yahaya. Do you want me to read it out? Are you fine for me to read it out?
Yes, please.
Okay. Northern Nigeria has the highest number of out-of-school girls, including adolescent girls and women. We've not seen any meaningful and dedicated efforts towards reversing this trend by the CSO and the private sector. Are there any efforts by the foundation to provide its inputs towards ameliorating this menace? Beju, I will let you answer that. And then I think that it would also be good to give other panelists, especially Professor Junaid, Crystal, if you've got any gender specific intervention that you're focusing on, I would like you to speak to that as well. And then I can make a general statement around, how I see both state and non-state actors and the work that's been done around, gender and inclusion within the education space as well. So Kwejo, over to you, and then Prof, and then Crystal. Is that okay? Let's do that.
Yes.
Let's go in
Yes.
that order. Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
so thank you very much, Tommy, and thank you, Bashiri Ahaya, for that question. We are actually about to launch an early learning program. It's called the Early Child Learning and Advancement Project. It's a holistic, integrated education solution that improves learning outcomes to strengthen foundational learning and to champion reading and numeracy for early grade and basic education. And our location of focus is actually the north of Nigeria. And that is going to be going live this year. We've already concluded the preliminary conversations around that investment. So we're going to be looking for the north, we're looking at Borno and Kano. And we're also looking at not just the north, but some parts of the west also. In the west, we're looking at southeast and southwest, looking at Abia and Oyo. It's going to be a pilot program, which we're going to be scaling up later on after we get the data and we see the impact. Like I mentioned earlier, our priority is on scaling what works. So to your question, yes, there are organizations that have done that. I was in a meeting with Wando Foundation last week or 2 weeks ago, and they have done fantastic work investing in education for both the girl child and the boy child in northern part of Nigeria. As a matter of fact, they're actually currently in Plateau State, and they're away from Plateau State today because the head of the foundation was supposed to be part of this session, but they are already at work. So she's on the field. That's why she's not here. So to your question, yes, private sector organizations are investing, have invested, and will invest to increase the knowledge and the intake of girl child in the northern part of the country, but not limited to the northern part of the country, because from the data from Dr. Godswill, it's clear that the issues around out-of-school children are not limited to the northern part of the country, even though there are more numbers there. It's a national issue, and we should be intentional to ensure we touch every part of the country.
Thank you very much for that, Kejo. Professor Junaid, do you want to comment on this question?
Well, yes. What I just want to add is there is a national policy on gender equality in education. And what regulators like UBEC do is to insist that the issue of the girl child is given equal consideration as that given to the boy child in terms of access, in terms of equity, and to encourage states in the north that have come up with initiatives like second chance education for girls, to address girls that have dropped out of school, maybe because they have been married off before completion, and to give them a second chance to continue with their education. And to make it almost criminal for any parent to remove his girl child from school for the purpose of marriage or some other reasons. And so regulators are quite, on toes to ensure that girls get equal opportunities as boys in education. And I think the Reverend doctor talked about lack of toilets. One of the issues that confronts the girl child education is lack of appropriate toilet facilities for them to address some of their needs. And so you find if a girl wants to ease herself, she has to knock on a neighbor's door and ask if she could do that, or go back home, which may be a distance from the school, and never come back. So again, like the WASH project is ensuring that adequate potable water and toilet facilities are made available to attract more girls to education. So these are some of the things to ensure that schools implement the national gender policy in schools so that girls are given a fair deal as boys are. That's just what I want to add to the
Thank you so much
conversation.
for that. Thank you so much for that, Prof. Crystal, do you have any comments to
Yeah,
add?
thank you. So as a professional, I've worked within Northern Nigeria, specifically in girls' education for several years. So I'm very aware of the situation. And I've been a part of the consultations with the policy, the national policy you just mentioned, Professor. So I know very well that Nigeria has put in place a lot of policies that support. There's the child rights policy as well, that also has some supporting elements to it. So what I've come to find out is that we need to address gender in a more wider perspective when it comes to education. And that's why GPE, I really do support our approach to gender, because it's including all genders, that we have to ensure that in order to get more girls into school, we cannot ignore males as well. We cannot ignore boys, we cannot ignore fathers, husbands, because this is all a part of the community that a girl child belongs to. And so we have to ensure that education is equal for all to be a part of it. And when we do that, we're including the girl child, ensuring that the elements that affect her, whether it's in school, whether it's at home, is also being addressed. And all of that goes into what we feel defines equality when we say quality education. So I do feel we have a lot of interventions in Northern Nigeria, which is great, but we need to look deeper into what stops the girl from actually attaining her education and access. And as mentioned by the Reverend Doctor as well, WASH facilities, that's one, that's very important. There are social cultural norms as well that we cannot ignore also. And so when we say gender, that policy, that national policy, we're trying to take a more wider approach to what a girl child needs in order to access education to the highest level.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Crystal. I see that we have been joined by Mr. Albert from ADIA. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And sorry for the delay. There was a confusion with time.
No, that's...
But I'm glad that at least I can follow part. I've been following the discussion, and thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to give the keynote that you would have given earlier at this point.
Thank you. Let me first express appreciation to the One Stealing Foundation for its effort to create opportunity of raising the need for more investment in education and training. I think we need more of this kind of initiative on the continent for a number of reasons. And some of these reasons have already emerged in this discussion. Number one, this is a youthful continent. Unless we are able to invest in quality education, there's not much we can achieve as a continent. I think we all agree on that. Second, I think it's important to acknowledge that much is actually happening on the continent. We are not saying nothing is not going on. There's so much going on. The problem, as Ibekwe already alluded to, is the way we coordinate ourselves as stakeholders to make sure that the investment that is being provided to education and training is actually supporting some of our needs and aspirations. And that's really the reality we have seen in many of the countries. So how best can we coordinate? How best can we support planning? Because planning is a critical. How best can we monitor progress and come up with remedies before things get into crisis? So we need to build systems, you know. When you see most countries, they manage to come up with sound policy, but the devils lie in our capacity to implement, our capacity to mobilize, to bring key stakeholders on board, to engage families. And I'm here basically looking at some of these challenges that we are having in education, starting from foundational learning. You know, if we're not able to fix foundational, then other level of education will suffer from that. And we are seeing this, you know. I've been seeing reports, research reports that are being produced. Unless we are able to provide the required support to foundational learning, other level of education will not actually be able to benefit. And therefore, the challenge will be actually to create opportunities for remedies that are not easy, actually, in many countries. Ibekwe, she remembered the event we had in Lusaka in October last year during the High-Level Policy Dialogue Forum, where ADEA convened countries and partners, including foundations, just to reflect on how much countries are able to integrate and to invest in the education following the Transforming Education Summit that took place in 2022 in New York, and the ADEA Triennale that took place in Mauritius in October 2022. And the idea here was to say, since we were in Lusaka, can we go and visit some of these schools to see how the policy reforms are actually being translated into action? So it was very interesting to find a country like Zambia that has been suffering from addressing some of the issues associated with foundational learning, including structured pedagogy, teaching at the right place, learning assessment, and so on and so forth, how they are able to translate these commitments into actions. And there have been some interesting interaction among ministers. And I think this is the kind of exercises that we need to engage in, learning from each other. I think we have gone beyond the time when countries in Africa were isolated based on their colonialist background. It's time to build a unified continent when something positive happening in Nigeria can actually be replicated elsewhere, as long as it is able to be adapted. So I think that's really one lesson that I learned from the last year event. Secondly, we all understand the need to align education, training, and the needs in the labor market. This has been one of the challenges in many of our systems. And you can see the private sector complaining about the quality of graduate coming from higher education or from technical and vocational education. You can see complaint coming from the training providers suggesting that unless the private sector is able to engage and support education, there's not much our education can do in terms of addressing the needs of the labor market. And again, this is what come out of this discussion. How do we strengthen and expand the partnership? The blame game will not actually address the issue that we are facing. We need to see all ourselves as stakeholders, because in the end, once a child is well educated, the society and the country as a whole will benefit. And this is really where I feel we need to put more silence, making sure that all key stakeholders understand this need. So in brief, let me again thank the One Selling Foundation for organizing this webinar. And we're looking forward even to engage more as we prepare for the 2024 social event. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity, and I'm happy to continue this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albert, for those remarks. And thank you for still taking time to join us, despite your very busy schedule. I'm going to throw another quick question at you since we have you here with us now. And the question is actually to both yourself and Beju. And it looks at, looking at the fact that CSR is seen as a tool for social impact as utilized by the private sector. How do you think we can maximize the opportunities in the private sector for improved foundational learning and employability skills?
That's a very important question indeed. So basically, I think the first thing we need to do is to change the narrative. Because you see, most of the time when we talk about education in Africa, people will always start by talking about the crisis, by the issues, by the challenges. Yes, of course, there are issues. There are issues of access, equity, and inclusion. There are issues of quality. There are issues of relevance. But the point I'm making here is that education is actually moving. When you see some of these young, talented graduates that are able to create their own enterprises, those are good success we need actually to show. And I hope during this year of education, we are not just going to be displaying or talking about issues. We should also celebrate the innovation and creativity that we see. And this is something we need to pursue. I think this is what we need to tell the private sector. Education is not just about a crisis. It's about empowering these young people, equipping them so that they can compete in the labor market. And this is really a good opportunity. So unless they join these efforts of reforming education, giving opportunity to these young people to get practical skills, because basically that's where I see the private sector playing a key role, not only just by investing, but also facilitating these young people to engage into internship, in workplace learning. There's not much we can actually achieve in terms of making our continent and our countries more competitive. So there's really an appeal during this year to clearly show the private sector that they are key stakeholders. The investment they can make in education will definitely have a good return, but as long as they see themselves as partners, as stakeholders. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. We are rapidly moving towards the end of our session. So I'm going to give the opportunity to our panelists to give us their closing remarks. And everybody has 30 seconds to a minute to articulate this really quickly so that we can get through the entire panel. But thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to our audience, the people who have taken time out of their busy schedules to join us today, and the questions for staying online and for engaging so actively with us over the last hour and a half. So I'm going to start as I can see people on my screen. Let me start with you, Professor Junaid. Do you want to give us your closing remarks really quickly, sir?
Well, I would just like to thank the organization for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this dialogue. And I do hope that there will be many more opportunities to come in and contribute to the discussion. Thank you all, and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Prof. I'll go to Dr. Bagua.
So I would like to very much thank Stanley One Foundation for the opportunity to be part of this insightful meeting. And I would like to thank my co-panelists for the ideas that they have shared here today and for the work that they have all been doing. I would like to also thank all our listeners across the globe and for the insights they have been sharing in the chat room. I've been reading quite a lot of them. I'm leaving a message to all of us, but especially to stakeholders in education, that we can come together and do some work. And for Stanley One and global partners and all of you investing in education, maybe it's time to look at what we already have in education, what we're already investing, and even to see if we're using them judiciously. When you read our report, you will find that we raised a serious issue there, how the investment Nigeria is making in education is not giving enough results because of the primary school, because of the local governments that are primarily charged with education. They no longer do that work because some state governments have hijacked that. And so if we can do some advocacy to let the local governments take over the work they have been doing and use the resources given to them by both the federal and state government, I think we will go a long way in salvaging the very difficult situation. So let's not just think about building school, private sectors bringing money and all that. Let's also do a little bit of advocacy. Nigeria has wonderful policies and everything, but it's implementation, and we need to advocate for the implementation of these policies. Thank you.
Okay, Crystal.
Thank you to Sterling One Foundation for this awesome platform that you created. Thank you to my co-panelists and to the wonderful moderator. I know it's not easy moderating, but you did a fantastic job. I guess my closing words are, I've spoken a lot about education financing, but I really want to highlight investing in education. Investment in education, not only meaning money, but in order for all of us to invest in education, that means do something. We've all talked about so many different interventions. Some people are replicating, but after so many years, especially focusing on Nigeria, I think we all just need to do something and then find others who are doing the same thing you're doing so that we can all do it together. And then eventually we'll be fixing issues. And so don't shy away from the fact that there's someone else doing what you're doing, or that you feel a certain area doesn't need any intervention. It all needs intervention in Nigeria. I will tell you that from my experience. But let's make sure that with this year being the African Union's Year of Education, we really try to move the needle on SDG 4 in Nigeria and also in Africa. It's really important. Africa has a very young population. And that's an opportunity for us here in Africa. That population is going to be the one that's going to drive a lot forward. As we know, in Nigeria, we had the Sorosoke generation. They're everywhere in Africa. And that's the type of energy that we need. And so with that closing, I'm excited about what this year is going to be with African Union. All the comments that have been in the chat, thank you for participating. I can feel everyone's passion for education, and I do hope that these numbers come down for out-of-school children in Nigeria and in Africa.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Mr. Albert, would you like
Thank you. Thank you. Let me again join the other panelists to congratulate the Steering One Foundation and Ms. Ibeko in particular. She is a dedicated person. I like her dedication. She's really passionate. Ms. Ibeko, I really appreciate the way you reach out, the way you push. You can see you really want to make changes and improvement in education. I really appreciate. We need people like you, as many as possible on the continent. So I really appreciate that. In my closing, I just want to share a few events that I think are going to be interesting. So one of them is, of course, again, as I said, a foundational learning meeting that we are organizing with one of the Nigerian organizations known as Human Capital Africa. So we will be having a ministerial coalition supporting foundational learning. A call is taking place on the 6th February. Then we will proceed with foundational learning events during the launch of the Year of Education in Addis from 12th and 13th. The reason I'm saying this is because we believe very much there's an opportunity to learn from each other. There is an opportunity to translate commitment into actions. So we need to take accountability on top of everything. We are accountable to our children. Let's make sure we raise it. Let's make sure that we all understand, unless each and everyone pays parts, we cannot actually evolve. Number two, we are also going to hold an event in Abuja, 14, 18 July, just before the next event by the Sterling One Foundation, where we'll be talking about education technology and how to improve education data system in our African countries. This event is going to take place in Abuja. So I would just want to inform you to make sure that since it's happening in Nigeria, we can learn from the country's achievement. We can also provide opportunity to our young people to be more creative. There are a lot of talented people in Nigeria. This is a great opportunity. This one is going to be done with the support from the MasterCard Foundation. Two other events that we are looking for in this regard, as I said, is around promoting reforms in technical and vocational education. We believe our young people need more exposure. They need more practical skills. And we would like to bring the private sector on board to see how best we can engage and make sure that once graduates are able to get exposure, then they can actually perform better in the labor market. That's also another event. Last but not least, we are also looking at improving higher education in Africa. We still believe there's an opportunity for improvement in terms of addressing homegrown solutions on the continent, using research, using innovation. So those are some of the things we believe we need to be concrete as we celebrate the Year of Education, and we need to showcase some success stories from the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Albert. Over to you, Pedro.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Let me first start by appreciating all our dynamic speakers. I know I have learned a number of things from this session. Thank you so much. Mr. Albert, thank you so much. Professor Mohammed, thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Dr. Godswill. And our amiable moderator, thank you so much, Adetomi. And what I would like to emphasize is that we, as a private sector, the private sector needs to come together more intentionally to invest in the education sector. At the Sterling One Foundation, we will be prioritizing that this year, and we'll be looking to work with more private sector organizations to work together to synergize for investments in the education sector. One. Two, we have various programs, and the programs and solutions. I already mentioned the Early Child Learning Advancement Project. We have the Adult and Non-Formal Education Program. We have a STEM project. We have a scholarship program that's ongoing. And then we have, with our partner, Sterling Bank, there's actually a platform working with EduBank that provides free capacity building for teachers. Dr. Godswill mentioned teacher quality. Professor Mohammed mentioned teacher quality. The solution is on EduBank. So EduBank spelled EDUBANC. So for teacher training, that's a solution that can be leveraged for teachers in Nigeria. And we're also looking to deepen our collaboration with the Federal Ministry of Education to see what we can do together to provide more online learning accessible from anywhere in the country for teachers in Nigeria. Of course, we also do offline training, but for easier access, the power of digitization is that it helps you to scale. And we will be doing that this year. Of course, there's education financing from our partner organization, Sterling Bank, across the entire value chain in the educational sector, not limited to students, parents, teachers, lecturers, vendors, basically the entire value chain of the education sector. And more information can be gotten on the organization's website for that. For us at the foundation, we will be having the Africa Social Impact Summit in July. So please mark your calendars and follow us on all our social media platforms at the Sterling One Foundation on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, and you will get all the relevant information. And you will also get more information on the next sessions of this series, because this is a conversation starter. In January of 2024, the African Union Year of Education, so much more will not just be discussed, but will also be implemented. And that's to Tomi's point. Tomi had mentioned, so what next? We're looking to set up a fund for increased financing in the sector, but beyond financing is now implementation for more structure. And like I mentioned, we'll be working with relevant stakeholders for implementation to not just comment, but also scale where good things are already being done. Those are my final words to our amazing participants from different countries, from all parts of the world that have joined us out of their very busy schedules. On behalf of our board at the Sterling One Foundation and our management, please permit me to express my sincere appreciation for your passion for better education for the Nigerian and African children and African youth and Nigerian youth. We say thank you, and we welcome you to partner with us to move the needle and to accelerate the achievement of SDG 4 by 2030. Thank you for your time.
And with that, we bring our conversation today to a close. As Pedro has said, the discussion continues. Please look out on all the platforms that she has mentioned for information about when the next session is going to be. It's been a robust, extremely rich, extremely engaging conversation. Thank you to all the panelists. My job as a moderator is to fly the plane and try and land it on time. I think we've landed 5 minutes past the estimated arrival time, but we've tried our best. It's been an extremely enriching and engaging conversation. Thank you to the Sterling One team, Pedro and the Sterling One team, for giving me the opportunity to moderate this and the platform for these conversations to take place. And have a good rest of the day. Yes?
Before the final word, I wanted us to take a picture, a digital picture with the panelists with their video on.
So that means
just
all the panelists have their video on. Okay.
Let's put on our videos.
All right.
I think Mr. Albert.
Yes, just a minute. I'm just opening.
Thank you.
Just a second. Well, can't find I'm using my phone. I can't find but you can go ahead. I cannot find my camera.
I know there are quite a number of questions left in the chat group. The response most likely will be sent. You can't find the camera.
I'm not able to get it. It's really strange. Where is the camera? I was reading the message and then I lost my camera. Wow.
It's fine.
Sorry, I'm not going to take too much of your time, so just go ahead. Please go ahead so that I don't.
Okay.
It's unfortunate.
Okay. I think the picture has been taken already.
Okay. All right.
No problem, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are you
Tomi,
going to
please.
share the picture with us?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perhaps I'll get some copies.
Yeah. Okay. So, and with that, we bring it all to a close. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience, and catch you, I guess, at the next discussion. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.